system literally thrives on emotional immaturity. You know what emotional immaturity requires? It requires you not recognizing the way that you give and impact others through your decision making. It also, when we're in relationships with emotionally immature people, what happens is we begin to mask who we really are in order to show up and get our needs met. And so this is the basis for most home life in our society, because where else do you have to do that? In a paycheck to paycheck job. You have to mask how you're really feeling in order to get your needs met. So the system is literally set up to support emotional immaturity, emotional volatility, which comes with emotional immaturity. And it's set up to have us dependent on someone else's approval of us versus finding our own autonomy and therefore creating our own values and our own standards and our own rules of life. And when you're no longer reliant on someone else's approval in order to function or have security or stability, you become a threat to the system. But it's almost like a game. Like, can you get out of it? Like, can you use their own medicine to remove yourself from the system and create a new way of living for yourself? Because it's the same medicine. It's the same thing. Like, when you're dependent on security, like, it's not like those dependents go away. It's rather that you begin to own them and know that there are places that you can get them without compromising. It's like really just an up level of your self-concept, moving from a 5-sensory human being to a multi-sensory human being, however you want to word it, evolving, ascending, like quantum leaping. It's really just a shift in your self-concept. And what really begins to develop is the way that you perceive value and the way that you operate with your emotions, emotional maturity, especially if you're someone who is like here to do work for the good of the collective. You'll definitely have to master this lesson. It's crazy. I realized that in order to get my needs met, I created personalities that other people liked. And I never actually learned to be myself. I never actually learned to have a personality outside of the things that I connected with other people on. And I realized, like, all the things I do are literally, it's not who I am, it's just a result of the energy that I'm given or that I'm living in. And if the circumstances were different, I might act differently. And so it's about bridging that gap now. Like, okay, well, if the circumstances were different, if I didn't have to rely on anyone, like, what would I be doing then? And I think as someone who's been in emotionally immature relationships most of my life, the idea of that is like, oh, well then, fuck everybody. I'm just gonna ignore everyone and I'm just gonna be by myself. And while that sounds great to our wounded self, the true self knows the value of connection and knows how important connection is for well-being. And that's the whole reason that you're upset in the first place. That's the whole reason that you're doing what you're doing in the first place, because your needs aren't met. And so you would only perpetuate the cycle if you decided to isolate yourself. The key is actually emerging into society in a new way, taking up space in a new way, showing up in a new way, and becoming the embodiment of your true self. And that looks unique to every single person. There's no one way to be your true self. Only you know how to be your true self. But it takes unlearning and relearning, and sometimes when we learn things as like the masked version of ourselves, or as the false version of ourselves, like the personalities that I created to please other people. When we learn things in those roles, we actually have to relearn them in the role of our true self. How would our true self operate in that situation? And even just the recognition that there is a difference between how you're acting and how your true self would act is enough awareness to propel you in the right direction. And it is increasing your emotional maturity because you're listening to your emotions and not making yourself bad or wrong. You're just being objective. But yeah, I've been unlearning and relearning through different versions of me. Like, there was a period of my life where I was a person that wasn't really me, and she learned how to do a lot of things. And I'm living in a different world, reality now, a different body, it feels like. And I have to like relearn some of the things that I was doing before. It's like, oh, right. It's because I'm learning it as this version of me. I'm fully integrating it into my true self versus the self that was living to please everyone else in order to find security. That shift is crazy. It's like literally shifting worlds. It's not an easy shift to make, especially when one world is trying to pull you back into it and the other world doesn't even know you exist yet. The most powerful thing that you can do is remain true to who your true self is, your God self is, and continue to walk in the direction of acceptance, appreciation, love, and also learning to have compassion. And I think this is where a lot of people get confused. Like, they're either on one end of the spectrum where it's like, it's all in the body, it's all 5D, where they're like, okay, we need to logically understand this and talk about it a million times before we get over it. But there's actually a balance to wisdom, and it happens when you have understanding and you also make the distinction of what it is you'd rather experience without being judgmental of what you are experiencing. It's like, oh, this is great feedback, thank you, moving on. And you're no longer submissive to the world outside of you because you have the knowledge and the understanding to filter through it and make understanding for yourself. But also you allow yourself to experience like the feelings, the emotions, the sensations that come up for you as you're moving through that process. But sometimes we get stuck in the body and we're like, oh, I have all these emotions, and then yeah, it creates panic in that way. Or sometimes we're too in the mind and we're like, oh my God, and completely numb to what our body is trying to tell us. And I think the most beautiful, most wealthy thing that you can do for yourself, for your family, for your generation, whether you intend to have kids or not, is to be yourself and to have compassion. Compassion comes through understanding, and understanding is the bridge to wisdom. Compassion is God. To know compassion is to know God. But you also have to know when to stand up for yourself, and you also get to be the fullest, most authentic version of you, because that's who you came here to be.